Starting now, Commonalities, where guests find common ground through uncommon conversations. Politics, religion, finances, all the topics your grandmother told you not to discuss with friends. And now, your host, Matthew Dowling, and today's guests on Commonalities.
Thank you for joining us once again on Commonalities. I'm Matt Dowling, alongside a former colleague of mine in the Pennsylvania House, a good conservative, as they say, Representative Mike Jones. Mike, thank you so much for being with us today. I want to allow you a moment or two to get your credentials out there. And as you do that, I know you were very involved with business and in the supply chain, running a corporation, and then you made a transition to politics. So why don't you give us a little bit of your background and tell us who Representative Mike Jones is?
Yeah, well, thank you, Matt. I really appreciate you having me. Congratulations on the new show. I'm honored to be one of your first guests here. So Mike Jones in York County, my district falls just south of the city of York down to the Mason-Dixon line. So we district borders Maryland. Just finishing up my second term and was just elected to a third 2-year term in the state legislature. So, and to your point, prior to that, I was really never involved in politics in any significant way. Been a lifelong Republican, of course, and voted and such, but was really busy running a great company here in York called St. Ange Company. Was president of that firm for about 11 years, worked there for over 20. When I left, that was about a 120-person organization. And one of the things, in addition to being a great company in and of itself, we consulted, to your point, on supply chain issues. So we designed distribution and manufacturing facilities and helped companies figure out how many of those facilities they should have and where they should be located for many of the nations and really the world's largest corporations. So I was really blessed to travel the country, did a decent amount of international travel as well, and really gained an appreciation for the greatness of American business and the great, the positive impact that it has not only in our country as far as creating jobs and tax revenue and so forth, but really around the world and the quality of life that American corporations and capitalism in general provide. So I'm a staunch capitalist. It's kind of like America. America's not perfect, but there's no close second, and capitalism's not a perfect system, but it sure beats the heck out of socialism. So I've been honored now to transition to politics and try to bring a little bit of that business experience and to the table.
And I think we're in a time frame where people are looking for someone who knows how to run a business. I myself, a small business owner, before going into politics, they want people that have signed the front of a paycheck, not just the back of a paycheck. I think you and I both agreed while I was in the legislature and serving with you that government needed to live more within its means. And that's something that we have to make our businesses do, but we don't always see government do that.
No, you're exactly correct. And unfortunately, that's one reason I've voted against every budget since I've been in the legislature. It's, as you know, there's a lot to like and dislike in most any budget, but the recurring thing that I've found to dislike is the amount of spending. And I would love to see us get the Taxpayer Protection Act passed, which would limit spending other than in emergency situations where we could, with a 2/3 majority, we could override it. But if passed, it would be a constitutional amendment that says, as you know, that spending could not exceed the combination of inflation and population growth. I've been disappointed really on both sides of the aisle. There's just it seems to be a never-ending appetite to spend other people's money. And as a result, our state is growing, literally growing older, smaller, and poorer by the day. And the only demographic that's growing is the over 85 demographic. We just lost another U.S. congressional seat, as you know, and with it, we lost another electoral vote. So it's a major problem. We should be an economic powerhouse, and instead, with excessive tax and regulation and spending, we're going the wrong direction.
Yeah, and so Mike, as you well know, and as our listeners have learned within the last week or so, that this show is about talking about opposing views. And normally we would have a Democrat and a Republican, or an independent and a Democrat, or so forth. But we have kind of an interesting case with you. And after we get our first break in, I want to talk a little bit more about this. You were kind of an outsider within the party, and I leaned your way a good bit. I was in the top 10 most conservative, top 10% of conservative members of the House. I know you beat me by a couple points there, but you were an outsider within your own party, and I think that's something that we really want to discuss today, because I think people at home think that within a party that we hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And as you know, and as you've experienced, that's not necessarily what happens. Sometimes the disagreements within a political party can be just as severe, if not more severe, than they are between both sides of the aisle. So we do have to get a quick break in, Representative Jones, and then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about being an outsider within your own party.
You're listening to Commonalities, where guests find common ground through uncommon conversations. We'll be back after this brief break to recognize our sponsors.
Are you enjoying the program you're listening to? Support Commonalities and help keep us on the air by making a donation of $5, $10, or $25, or any amount you feel comfortable sharing online at donate.commonalities.online. Again, that is donate.commonalities.online on the World Wide Web. Buy our host a cup of coffee or help pay for airtime at donate.commonalities.online.
When it comes to buying a home, what you see isn't exactly what you get. That's why home buyers should call Dave Dowling at Grandview Inspections at 724-208-4108. You'll see colorful flowers, freshly painted walls, granite countertops, gleaming hardwood floors, and other touches. What you can't see is the cracks, ancient plumbing, dangerous wiring, or broken appliances that might be revealed when you hire a home inspector. And when it comes to home inspectors, knowing yours has the qualifications and experience needed should be your number one concern. Dave Dowling with Grandview Inspections is an architectural engineer with over 30 years of commercial construction experience and hundreds of inspections under his belt. A home inspection is an opportunity for you to hire an expert to walk through the home and prepare a report outlining the home's major components, what needs immediate attention, and what will require maintenance after you move in. Your home is one of your biggest investments, so make sure your investment is everything you hoped it to be. Call Dave Dowling at Grandview Inspections at 724-208-4108.
Well, thanks for sticking with us on Commonalities here on WMBS 590 AM 101.1 FM and any place you download your favorite podcasts. I'm Matt Dowling alongside my former colleague, Representative Mike Jones from York County, serving the south central part of that county there. And before we went to break, Mike, I started to allude to the fact that you were kind of an outsider within the party. So why don't you explain to the viewers and the listeners what that means?
Yeah, so I kind of ran on the premise we were talking about my business background a little bit before the break. And so I ran on the premise that I was, a business guy who was not a career politician and, did not sort of need the job, so to speak. And I guess I kind of took that to heart. But in any event, what happened in my case was it really, Matt, ties back to the lockdowns And, and you and I and most everyone in our party agreed that the governor really exploited his, I'll call it executive privilege in his emergency powers and in shutting down businesses. And we saw schools shut down and so forth. And a couple months into that, it became apparent to guys like you and myself that there was really, these were just bureaucrats making decisions with really no medical or strategic, justification. And that started a process here in York. We did something that I don't believe anybody else did across the state. I spearheaded something called Reopen York. And we had a legal fund that we pulled together from the business community to defend business owners against the state if they would come after them. We had PPE, we had best practices, we had marketing and messaging. We even had psychologists available to help these folks because what was being done to their businesses was criminal. And some folks might be familiar with Round the Clock Diner. That was the most prominent business here in York. Got a lot of national attention on Fox News and so forth. In any event, I share that because during that process, and maybe we did or didn't handle it perfectly, but at least we did something and we pushed back against tyranny. And we ultimately had over 300 businesses. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, Matt, but we had over 300 businesses that defied the governor's orders and stayed open. And not one of them went to jail. Not one of them closed their doors. Not one of them lost a license that he was trying to weaponize against them. And if they were smart, none of them even paid a fine. So the reason I share that is we then went into vaccine mandates and mask mandates on our students. And we went from, our doctors and nurses in particular, who we were hailing as frontline heroes, as we were rightfully so. We're now talking about firing them because they wouldn't get unproven vaccines against their will. Now, vaccines are great if that's what you chose to do, but the notion of firing these people because they refused to take an unproven vaccine, masking of children who were at virtually no risk from the virus, and then the third big bucket was election reform. And on the heels of the 2020 election, we had a lot of people that were not only angry, but scared and disenfranchised, as to whether their votes were properly counted and that sort of thing. So in the wake of all of that, I had a couple of senior colleagues here in York, and they just didn't show up to any of those things. They voted the right way. But for a year and a half, when we're out there on the front lines, and people were scared and hurting and businesses being shut down, people out of work. I had a 62-year-old waitress I'll never forget. She had literally fell through her front door with a panic attack because she had not gotten a paycheck in 8 weeks, and nobody at the Department of Unemployment was picking up at the Labor Department. And so some of my colleagues were just nowhere to be found on the front lines. And I had tried to warn them for a year or two what was coming, and they ended up getting challenged in primaries. And for me, the straw that broke the camel's back, little tougher issue for you out there in the western part of the state, but was fully funding the University of Pittsburgh, who we found doing barbaric experiments with fetal tissue, taking the skin from 4 and 5 month old aborted babies and sewing it onto lab mice. And a couple of my guys here did nothing. So I took kind of an unprecedented step of endorsing the challengers, both of whom ultimately won in the primaries and will now be seated in January when they're sworn in, Wendy Fink and Joe Diorsi. So needless to say, and I understand that, the establishment Republican Party did not appreciate that. And it's not something I did lightly. And maybe someday I'll look back and reflect on it differently. But I did what I thought I had to do at the time. And so as a result, I was stripped of three of my 4 committees and put up in the front row, moved my seat on the House floor up to the very front row, and sat me next to the Democrats. But, I'm a grown man. I can take it. There are consequences. But to your point, and I apologize for a long answer here, Matt, but you made a great point before the break. A lot of times the tensions and I think oftentimes productive. I don't know that I'd even call it it is a little bit of infighting, but a lot of it's good, healthy debate as well. But there's a lot of debate within the party that people don't see because it's generally not public. we do that 95% of that occurs, rightfully so, behind closed doors in what we call the caucus room. So you won't see Republicans debating with Republicans very often, in television interviews or even on the House floor, but that doesn't mean it doesn't occur. And so I think that's something people, to your point again, might be interested to know. There is plenty of debate within the party, but it just tends to be a little more behind the scenes.
To your point, 25 years from now, God willing, I'm still living and around. I will never forget hearing recess in the House has been extended for 15 minutes. I think I hear that over and over. And for the listeners at home that don't know, when we're in the caucus room, the Democrats are in their caucus room, we may say that we're going to caucus for an hour or an hour and a half. And we'll return to the floor to vote. But our debate becomes rather lengthy at times. And there literally have been all afternoons that have been extended 15 minutes at a time so that we can continue that debate before returning to the floor to do the work of the people. And, I think that's actually, it's actually, as you said, healthy because we don't really want just one view to be recognized all the time. Although many of us are pretty staunch in what our beliefs are, you do have the opportunity to change minds in the caucus room and to think of things a little differently. Now I know we talked about the pandemic already and about the hurt that it put on people, especially our small business owners, from restaurants to school teachers, the whole nine yards. Everyone was affected. One of the things you've been working on has been economic growth. And I believe you started the Economic Growth Caucus because we came out of this pandemic and we were in a lot of trouble. And the Commonwealth's going to have to find ways to grow the economy as we move forward. So why don't we talk a little bit about that Economic Growth Caucus?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, again, coming with a business background and really being out of my element. And to some extent, I still kind of am up in Harrisburg. I tell people I'm never going to be a great legislator in the traditional sense of getting, a lot of bills passed and up on the wall. I think hopefully I do a little bit of that. And there's a skill set that some people have. I'm not going to be the world's greatest debater on the floor. We've got some brilliant guys up there, as you know, like Paul Schemmel and Tim Bonner, a lot of them with legal backgrounds that are just really remarkable, what I would call traditional kind of lawmakers. But my role is to kind of bring the business community and the grassroots to bear and make sure their voices are heard and that they can impact policy. And to that end, when I first got to Harrisburg, I met a gentleman named Mike Tobash, who is now retired. And obviously you and I served with him, Matt, from up in Schuylkill County. And Mike was a business guy. And I said, do we have many folks up here with business backgrounds? And it wasn't a very big number. You get a lot of political science majors, a lot of attorneys and so forth. And there's a role for everybody. Don't get me wrong. But so what we did is you're correct. So I ended up co-founding about almost 4 years ago now, the Economic Growth Caucus. And then I've chaired that ever since. So there's about 25 members. You said early on in your monologue there that we want people that have signed the front of a paycheck, not just the back of a paycheck. And you and I have both done that. So these are folks that either owned or led a business or held a senior management position in a corporation. And we really focus on 4 areas. Probably the least controversial is workforce. We're sending way too many kids to college, about 45% of whom will have no degree at all in 6 years. And then there's another chunk, of course, that will have degrees they never use. So a lot of these kids will have nothing but wasted time and debt to show for the experience. In the meantime, and I don't know the statistics in your neck of the woods, Matt, but in York County, 20% of our jobs are manufacturing. That's double the state average. So we are in desperate need of machinists and electricians and carpenters and plumbers and so forth. In the meantime, we're wasting taxpayer dollars to send a lot of students to college that would be better off in trade or vocational schools. And oh, by the way, we're sending them there in many cases to be indoctrinated in socialism, which is the enemy of America, and capitalism, in my opinion. We look at energy policy, which you're more astute on than I am, being from you're out in the western part of the state. We should be an energy powerhouse, and we're continuing to shoot ourselves in the foot with, like, most recently the Wolf trying to get us into the regional greenhouse gas initiative. We look at tax policy. We finally got a slight reduction in the corporate net income tax, but we're way too high on corporate net income tax. Very few companies even consider in major investments here in Pennsylvania. And again, we should be an economic powerhouse. From a supply chain perspective, we're perfectly positioned geographically. We might have a lot of potholes, but the bottom line is we have great infrastructure in the sense that we have a lot of roads. We are central to a lot of the U.S. population, close to ports and so forth. And then lastly is regulatory, which is even really worse for our business climate than taxes, because we are so difficult to do business with. The Department of Environmental Protection is out of control. Permits that take 3 or 4 months in many states will take 1.5 years or 2 years here in Pennsylvania. So we've been championing legislation. I think we could have done a lot more for small business on the heels of the pandemic. There was probably no greater time when people were more sympathetic to the cause of small business. We did get a couple things done. I don't want to put your listeners to sleep, but we got accelerated depreciation for capital investment. We got something called like-kind exchange. Some things that I say aren't real sexy, but would go a long way in helping our businesses. We're championing something called deemed approved permitting, which would accelerate the permitting process, trying to keep DEP out of these real small projects. Say, hey, look, you shouldn't be involved in anything that's less than 5 acres. It's currently 1 acre. So there's some little things that aren't going to be headline grabbers, but would go a long way in helping our businesses, and of course, continuing to chip away at the crazy tax burden we have here.
Now, Mike, people may look at us and I try to be objective here on this program now that I have retired from the House. But, there's no hiding the fact that I was a conservative Republican member while I was there, and continue to espouse those beliefs in my personal life, et cetera. So I think sometimes people would paint people like you and I with a broad brush and say, this is what a conservative Republican looks like. Okay, we're the guys that get the awards at CPAC and things like that. But that being said, I think there are some things that may shock some individuals. And, you talked a little bit about kids that need training for the workforce that we have available, and about the trades. I'm a big supporter of of private sector unions. Public sector unions are a different situation, but I think if my sons wanted to go become an electrician and become an apprentice and go through that system rather than going to a traditional college, I wouldn't be worried or offended by that. And I wanted to get kind of your take. What are your opinions on the training that unions offer?
Yeah, I think there's sort of like 3 buckets, right? And you touched on 2 of them. So you've got the public sector unions, which is basically the teachers unions and the state employees. And I'll tell you right up front, I think the teachers unions, not teachers, the teachers unions are the greatest source of evil in our state for a lot of reasons. That's how passionate I am about that. Then you have and we'll circle back to that. And they're absolutely killing us with, I think, on curriculum. They're way outside their lane. They've gotten so much money and have had so much power go to their head that they've become what they set out to fight. Years ago, you would say, well, unions were there to fight these corrupt, greedy big businesses. Well, the teachers union has become exactly that. And I think and the burden that it's putting on taxpayers with the pension system and so on and so forth. Then you've got what I would call your traditional, like a shop union. So for example, I grew up in a UAW household. My dad was a UAW member at Caterpillar, machine operator here in York when they still had manufacturing here. And then you've got the trade unions. And as you know, as you kind of go across that spectrum, the general membership has trended more and more Republican. So I would venture to guess, you may know better than I do, Matt, but I would venture probably well over half the trade union members in the state probably tend to vote Republican, and even a lot of your traditional like UAW Teamster types. My dad was just that. He was a Democrat that became a Republican thanks to Ronald Reagan, and really voted on guns and abortion more so than he did on traditional union issues. But I think the trade union model is fantastic. If you look at what they do, the worker training, the emphasis on safety, they're fighting, for member benefits and so forth, and quality of life. They self-fund a lot of those things. And so I think it's a great model. I think we as Republicans have tried to continue, as Reagan said, it's a big tent. And we've continued to try to strengthen our relationship, particularly with the trades. The main frustration that I at least have had is they continue to go to bat for the public sector unions. We see the police and the firefighters doing the same thing. And to some extent, I get it. But to the other extent, it's hard for us to work with them if they won't work with us a little bit and find some common ground. So as you know, we have a lot of bills that focus just on public sector issues, but the trades and others will invariably come to bat for them, and they carry a lot of weight. So I wish we could find a little bit of middle ground there. A little easier said than done. But yeah, we have to do everything we can to champion workforce development, like we've talked about, everything from pipe fitters to welders and electricians and plumbers and carpenters. And we need to do a better job as a party emphasizing those skills and doing what we can to collaborate, in particular with the trades. And it's obviously critically important out west where energy is such a big sector for you guys. And so I think we've made progress. I wish they could be a little more collaborative and not defending what I think are really some common sense reforms on the public sector side. But we'll keep plugging away on that.
And you already touched a little bit on the DEP and regulation that's there. Some of these regulations are shutting down the quote unquote shovel ready projects that are out there and are supposed to exist because permitting is just so difficult. I know I see that in the gas and oil industry here in the foothills of Appalachia here in Fayette County and in Somerset County. Their projects are being held up, and so sometimes we have to fight for those trade guys.
If you don't mind just a second on that, that's really a killer, arguably even a bigger issue than some of our unfriendly tax policies. Because having consulted, I talked at the onset there that I did a lot of consulting for large and very large companies. They drag their feet like everybody else. And, if they can go to Ohio or Maryland or West Virginia or whatnot, and get a project up and running in 3 or 4 months, they're not going to mess around with Pennsylvania taking a year and a half. And DEP is really out of control. They ought to focus on their core competencies, safe drinking water and things like that. They've got their hands in way too many pies. And I don't know how you see it, but it looks to me like they're in the business. Their charter should be to make sure that projects are approved quickly, efficiently, and and that they're adhering to safety standards. I think they've really gotten to where they're activists and they're in the business of killing projects that they don't happen to like, and that's just it has huge consequences on our economy, and that's one reason that a lot of young people are leaving the state. So it's a big deal.
Well, Mike, I got to get another break in here real quick. And when we come back, we're going to talk about one of those other issues where you've been able to cross the aisle and kind of have conversations with people outside of the party. May not be the traditional Republican viewpoint, but we'll get to that as soon as we get our next sponsor recognition.
You're listening to Commonalities, where guests find common ground through uncommon conversations. We'll be back after this brief break to recognize our sponsors.
Is your business using analog strategies in a digital marketing world? If so, then contact Matthew or Rebecca Dowling at Coordinated 360 for a professional consultation, where we bring in-depth knowledge and functional expertise with a holistic perspective. Coordinated 360 provides digital marketing, paid ad and media buying services, web design, social media management, video production, and more for businesses, organizations, and political campaigns. With decades of experience, Matt and Becky at Coordinated 360 can help you craft your unique message and share it with the world. For a no-risk media evaluation and recommendations, call 724-320-2212 or visit us online at www.coordinated360.com. Find us also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or email info@coordinated360.com.
Are you enjoying the program you're listening to? Support Commonalities and help keep us on the air by making a donation of $5, $10, or $25, or any amount you feel comfortable sharing online at donate.commonalities.online. Again, that is donate.commonalities.online on the World Wide Web. Buy our host a cup of coffee or help pay for airtime at donate.commonalities.online.
When it comes to buying a home, what you see isn't exactly what you get. That's why home buyers should call Dave Dowling at Grandview Inspections at 724-208-4108. You'll see colorful flowers, freshly painted walls, granite countertops, gleaming hardwood floors, and other touches. What you can't see is the cracks, ancient plumbing, dangerous wiring, or broken appliances that might be revealed when you hire a home inspector. And when it comes to home inspectors, knowing yours has the qualifications and experience needed should be your number one concern. Dave Dowling with Grandview Inspections is an architectural engineer with over 30 years of commercial construction experience and hundreds of inspections under his belt. A home inspection is an opportunity for you to hire an expert to walk through the home and prepare a report outlining the home's major components, what needs immediate attention, and what will require maintenance after you move in. Your home is one of your biggest investments, so make sure your investment is everything you hoped it to be. Call Dave Dowling at Grandview Inspections at 724-208-4108.
You're listening to Commonalities on WMBS Radio 590 AM, 101.1 FM, and any place you download your favorite podcasts. You can also tune in for the video version on Facebook. Just search for Matthew Dowling, find my public profile, and you'll be able to watch rebroadcasts of Commonalities every Tuesday and Thursday. I'm here with my former colleague, Representative Mike Jones of South Central York County, and we've been talking a little bit about how he's a conservative Republican, but doesn't always fit that mold, or how there are some differences that you're not just able to paint a politician with a broad brush. So one of the items that I know you worked on, Mike, in the Pennsylvania House over the past couple of years has been criminal justice reform. And that's not always a cornerstone of the Republican caucus at the federal level or at the state level. But it's something I know you feel strongly about, and maybe have had the opportunity to reach across the aisle and have conversations with our Democratic brethren about criminal justice reform. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the work you've done in that field?
Yeah, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity, Matt. It was certainly when I first ran for office, I guess almost 5 years ago now. Criminal justice reform wasn't even on my radar. I'm a pretty traditional, tough on crime kind of conservative Republican. And when I got very early in my tenure, I think it was February of 19, I'd only been in office a little over a month. I actually accepted an invitation from the Democratic Black Caucus to attend an event at a women's prison We have 2 women's state penitentiaries in Pennsylvania. One of them is in Muncie outside of Williamsport. And it was I think it was over the Martin Luther King holiday as part of Black History Month. In any event, there were 2 Republicans, Cheryl DeLozier from Cumberland County, who's also been a champion of criminal justice reform, and myself, and about 8 Democrats. And that ended up setting me on what has now been a nearly 4-year journey, championing a couple of issues that, as I said, were never even really on my radar screen. And one of those is dignity for incarcerated women, which for the first time ever, we got out of the House committee. I appreciate our colleague Rob Kaufman, the chairman of Judiciary, running a bill that wasn't on his top 10 list, but he was willing to collaborate and get it out of committee for me. And then we had it pass the entire House floor. So our hope is that in next session, we'll get it all the way to the governor's desk. But that basically, in a nutshell, recognizes that prisons weren't really created with women in mind. Women, obviously, particularly pregnant women, have some unique needs. And it basically said, I tell people, look, I'm a businessman, an American, and a Christian. And as a businessman, a lot of this is just bad business. We want to do all we can to end the cycle of crime, end that revolving door. We want people to get out of prison and get into the workforce, not come right back to jail. But to do that, we got to meet people in the middle a little bit. And so part of this is recognizing that while women are there, they're still our mothers and sisters and daughters and neighbors, and they need to be treated with dignity. It's also a bit of a pro-life aspect to it, to make sure that we minimize trauma on unborn children and try to minimize the impact on minor children that some of these women still have at home. And then very quickly, I say, look, as an American, it's the land of opportunity and second chances. None of us want to be judged on our worst day. I certainly don't want to. And lastly, as a Christian, we are all in need of redemption. And I may, not have done anything to land myself in jail, but I'll be the first one to raise my hand and say that, I need forgiveness and redemption. So this is nothing about being soft on crime. It's just trying to treat women with dignity. In many cases, these women are where they are because of, and I'm not justifying their behavior, but a lot of them, there's a disproportionately more instances where women have found themselves incarcerated because of associating, quite frankly, with a bad man. One of the other ones I really want to look at this coming session, it could be one of the few upsides to the Democrats having control of the House, is I'd like to look at geriatric parole, where we say that certain criminals, if they incarcerated individuals, when they've reached a certain age and they've served a certain number of years, so maybe they've reached the age of 60 and they've served 30 years of a life sentence, that they would at least be eligible for parole. A lot of these folks long since aged out of crime. It's costing us a ton of money. And many of them would be great mentors back in society, not only holding down jobs, but trying to help direct younger men and women, away from a life of crime. It's common sense legislation that I'd like to try to see us go forward. There's a lot of exceptions. We're not going to help people that hurt kids, for example, or anything like that. But there are a lot of people that made bad decisions when they were, teenagers or young men or women that have probably earned at least consideration, not a pardon, but consideration for parole. So those are 2 things in particular. I made about 8 or 10 trips to Philadelphia, usually speaking to predominantly Black audiences. So you can imagine they don't expect to see some white business guy from the suburbs who was twice ranked the most conservative in the state down in Philly talking about criminal justice reform. So that's one of the great things about your show. There's it's not as black and white as people think it is in the political world. There's a lot of room for negotiation and common ground, and you can build friendships across the aisle.
Well, and I think whenever we're talking about criminal justice reform, luckily you're not the only Republican that is on board. We're not saying open up the doors and let everyone out. Quite frankly, I didn't agree with some of the prisoners that were released during the pandemic because of overcrowding in our state penitentiaries, et cetera. But I do think there's room for criminal justice reform, and even the Americans for Prosperity, which sometimes some of their members make me look a little bit as a leftist, in comparison. But the Americans for Prosperity have taken the opinion, and I've talked to them, that it's costing us money to keep these people in prison, and they're unable to be productive members of society. So if they're not a harm to themselves or others, why not look at getting them back into the community where they can do some good and generate some income of their own and maybe lead a productive life. Not to mention, I think some of these reforms will actually not only help us with long-term, with people that have long sentences, but people with shorter sentences that where we see recidivism being higher than maybe it should be.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think, I was actually just did a prison visit in Chester County a few months back and met some of these lifers. I think if people, and again, I'm a tough on crime guy. I'm okay with the death penalty when it's warranted and things like that. So, but you meet some of these individuals and you're like, as I said earlier, this is just bad business and defies logic. And to your point, you make a good point too, on some of the shorter sentences. Another area we have to look at is some of these things become almost self-fulfilling prophecies. And what I'm alluding to is the fines that we're burdening people with in particular. And a lot of times that's coupled with taking their driver's license. So you're putting people back on the street saying you got to pay back. Now, I'm not talking about restitution. If you did damage, that needs to be repaid. But when you've got municipalities and the state piling on with excessive fines, while at the same time dramatically curtailing the individual's ability to make a living, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that they're going to go back into that criminal element, if you follow. And again, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of gray area here, but we're going to have to get a lot smarter, especially when these people are desperately needed in the workforce. And there's some bad actors. We had a very conservative judge here who's since retired, Judge Trebilcock in York, who was kind of a pioneer in the area of drug courts and veterans courts and so forth. He himself was a veteran. And he would tell you that I was actually shocked. He said it's probably 80%, at least 75, maybe 80% of the people that come before him really that he had to send to jail really should not have been going there. They had other issues. We see a lot of people with mental health issues in particular that we're housing in the jails. And there's 20-25% that are bad actors that we need to lock up and probably never see the light of day. But there's another big chunk of the population where we've really got to rethink what we're doing here, because it's a huge cost, and in many cases we're actually increasing, not decreasing, the recidivism. To your point.
Sure. Hey, Mike, we got to get one quick break in, and we'll come back and close out the show today. You're listening to Commonalities on WMBS Radio.
Are you enjoying the program you're listening to? Support Commonalities and help keep us on the air by making a donation of $5, $10, or $25, or any amount you feel comfortable sharing online at donate.commonalities.online. Again, that is donate.commonalities.online on the World Wide Web. Buy our host a cup of coffee or help pay for airtime at donate.commonalities.online.
You're listening to Commonalities on WMBS 590 AM, 101.1 FM, and any place you download your favorite podcasts. And if you know of a friend or family member that enjoys podcasts, we'd ask you to remind them to give us a listen at commonalities.online or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, every place you download your favorite radio programs. I'm Matt Dowling. Today, my guest is Representative Mike Jones of South Central York County. And Mike, we have just about 2 minutes left. Any closing thoughts for us here today?
Yeah, well, first of all, again, I want to congratulate you on your show. I have a tremendous amount of respect for you. Enjoyed our time together in the legislature. And I really like the format. I think just with limited time and sort of in the spirit, I think, of what you're trying to accomplish with your show, I like to say that, we don't get better by just surrounding ourselves with people who tell us what we want to hear. So it's always good, I'm sure many of our core beliefs we're going to have with us, till the day we die. But I have found tremendous benefit in while I can be passionate and opinionated, I don't need to be arrogant about it. And I can be humble and listen to other opinions, whether it's across the aisle or from within my own party. And, always be open to the possibility that, hey, maybe I'm wrong, or maybe somebody's got a better idea. And lastly, in that regard, one thing I would like to see in Harrisburg, a lot of times compromise is just bipartisan just means easy stuff, or it means watered down. And I think we can do a lot more horse trading. And a great example is like small business legislation that would be really substantive, that a lot of Democrats could either support or at least live with in exchange for something like criminal justice reform that they're passionate about. We might not be as passionate, but it's good policy and we could live with it. And that's something I would love to see going forward, is a little more horse trading on substantive issues, rather than just watered down, feel good bipartisan. Because it's not that we don't agree, it's that we've lost the art of debate, healthy, friendly debate. So that's kind of my closing thought for you there. And again, congratulations. And I appreciate you having me.
Well, thank you so much for being with us here, Mike. It is Thanksgiving week, and I find myself very thankful for the time that I had in the legislature, not just to do the work of the people, but to meet people like yourself and to meet people on both sides of the aisle who are just great human beings. Even if we don't agree on every issue, I think many politicians just want to leave their communities a little bit better than they found them. My guest today was Representative Mike Jones from York County. Mike, thank you so much for being with us, and have a great Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Matt. You do the same. Hope you and your family are doing well.
This has been Commonalities, a show where guests find common ground through uncommon conversations. Copyright 2022 Coordinated 360. All public rebroadcasts should be done with prior written approval from Matthew Dowling. All requests should be sent to info@coordinated360.com. Thank you for listening to Commonalities.